A man that knows a thing or two about looking after the pennies in order to save the pounds. Mr. Alex Salmond, the former First Minister of Scotland. Welcome, Alex. Thank you very much for...
Pleasure to be here, mate, and a pleasure to see you back.
It's great to be back, and it's great to be back in this wonderful new studio. We're going to talk about Rishi Sunak. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things. How has he survived 1 year in office, I suppose, is the first question. About 7.5 times longer he's been in than Liz Truss.
Yes, he should get a long service medal. A long service medal for Tory Prime Minister. My achievement, I've lasted a year.
He's only lasted a year, really, though, because nobody's actually questioned what he's been doing. But when you get to the end of the year and you look at his 5 pledges and you go, well, none of those have really actually changed. In fact, if they have changed, they've changed for the worse. He hasn't stopped the boats. He hasn't brought the waiting list down to the NHS. Inflation, some of it's come down a bit, but nothing really to do with him. Growth, I don't think we've got any. I can't remember what the 5th one was.
Well, exactly. I was just about to congratulate you on being the one person in the country who could remember what the 5 pledges were. It's too many.
Yeah.
People can only remember 3 things.
Yes.
Limit the short-term memory.
Yeah.
So even getting the number of pledges wrong, I mean, I think Sunak would have been better to concentrate on 1 pledge, whatever it might be, because I think that's about his limit.
Well, I think it would be good, wouldn't it, if you could say, right, let's do 1 at a time. You know, once we've got the 1 occupied and ticked off, then we can have another one. You know, it's a bit like when you're having to deal with somebody who's got various problems, whether they be alcoholic problems or drug problems. You go 1 step at a time. It's a 12-step programme. Yeah, you know, tomorrow, try and do that. And then the next day, we'll try something else.
You know, your destiny is to be a political advisor in Downing Street with a dying Conservative administration.
Afford me. No, they can't afford me. I think if I got the call, it would be yet another no from me.
Well, I mean, see, the reason that Rishi Sunak's still in office is that the Tories know they can't change Prime Minister yet again. Right. You know, even if they want to, and they probably want to by now. I mean, you know, they say that some people look like Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak doesn't even look like a politician. No. I mean, this is a guy who doesn't have empathy, even for millionaires. Yeah. This is a guy who's so rich that millionaires are a step below him, and people sense it.
Some people have said recently, though, particularly after he went to Israel, that he looks better on the world stage than he does at home. And that's sometimes a thing, certainly for American presidents, you know, because American presidents, as you'll know from your history, is something that, you know, whenever they've got domestic troubles, they go and start a war somewhere, or they go and start flying around the world with the State Department and look as if they know what they're doing.
Yeah, because you've got a war zone because it's safer than being at home in a political zone, but that doesn't win you elections. I mean, look, if I was to say one reason why Rishi Sunak's going down to catastrophic defeat over the next year, which is his last, because he'll go right to the end, there'll be about a year left, so he'll be 2 years in office. There's about 4 million people who are going to move from fixed-term mortgages at low rates to 8% mortgage at flexible rates. Right. And each and every one of these families, a lot of whom will be natural Tory voters, are going to say, look, this guy in Downing Street, I can't afford my bills. Each one of these families will come under the most severe financial pressure to join many, many other millions of families who are already in that position. Yeah. There is absolutely no way he can turn this around.
But will they not also have a sort of a reverse ferret effect on that? Because I've also heard this theory purported by people, which is that if you are badly off and the Tories are in power, what you won't do is get a different government, which might make you even worse off. Because what I've heard is if people are actually a bit more comfortable, they might say, do you know what, we're fed up with the Tories, we'll kick them out. But if they're actually in the deep doo-doo financially, they won't.
Well, that's the Tories' ill-deserved reputation for economic competence. But there's a story in, I think it's The Guardian today, so I'll treat it with some suspicion.
Oh, I haven't caught up with that yet.
But it's the National Institute of Economic and Social Research are pointing out that because they didn't insure against higher interest rates, and remember, they've got a governor of the Bank of England who is pushing up interest rates month by month, you know, 13, 14 times, but they didn't insure against it, the Treasury, and as a result, they've just lost £11,000 million, which is even more than Gordon Brown lost by selling gold at rock-bottom prices. Now, it's that sort of thing that dents the Tories' reputation for economic competence, which is already badly dented by, you know, having a governor of the Bank of England who doesn't even have an economics degree.
Well, so and who also doesn't even know how much money he earns. He can't even remember.
Well, he can't remember his own salary, which
it's not a great start.
I'm with the work. I mean, of course, he was actually in the middle of a peroration saying that the workers should tighten their belts and not demand high... And then he got asked, what's your salary? Oh, I can't remember.
Right, you know, something near £500,000.
Well, it's a lot more than that, mate.
Give or take a few bonuses and all of that. Let's talk about Scotland, because since I've properly spoken to you, I think, the Labour Party has won a seat up there, the SNP previously held. What's your take on that? Is it likely that Starmer and Labour and the new Anna Sarwar leader up there can actually win a bunch of seats for Labour?
Well, interesting enough, the swing in Rutherglen was very similar to the swing against the sitting party in Scotland, the SNP, than the swing against the Tories in the English by-elections. And also the turnout was dismal as well. So you've basically got two things happening. There's a huge swing against the incumbent party, north and south of the border. And actually, if you look at the turnout figures, people aren't really that mobilised at the press.
They're pretty disenchanted, aren't they?
So, you know, Starmer's going to win on current form without doing very much. Now, that should be an opportunity to recover ground because, you know, Starmer looks like he couldn't burst a paper bag in terms of political
I mean, I'm
impact.
old enough to remember the days when the Labour Party had 48 or so seats in Scotland.
Well, I'm old enough to remember when opposition leaders like Harold Wilson or even Tony Blair, and for all sorts of reasons, particularly the invasion of Iraq, I usually cross myself when I remember when I say Tony Blair's name. But as an opposition leader, he was impressive. But Starmer's not in that quality, not in that character. So the opposition, I mean, the opportunity should be there. The trouble for the SNP at the present moment, I mean, Humza Yousaf, you know, he's starting to tear up a lot of his predecessor, Nicola Sturgeon's mad policies. So he's torn up daft fishing policies. He's torn up daft bottle schemes. He's gone back to a council tax freezer policy borrowed from me, which obviously helps people in economic crisis. But one of the things that he doesn't do, he does this, you know, one by one and by stealth. And what he should be doing, in my opinion, is making a big song and dance.
What's the point of doing it otherwise?
Well, you should be saying, I'm tearing it. It's a new agenda for a new leader. I'm going to make a stir. But his big weakness, and of course, his big opportunity, is that for the first time, probably in its history, certainly for the first time in a quarter of a century, the SNP has no independent strategy.
No. Well, and they announced that with great sort of fanfare, as if that was a good thing. You know, they had their conference, and suddenly they said, right, we're not going to bother without having any kind of strategy for independence. We're just going to continue on, assuming that we'll get there someday.
Well, what they've said is, you know, it's like the old chant, what do we want independence, when do we want it now? What the SNP are now saying is, what do we want a democratic effect?
Yes.
And when do we want it? Well, no time soon.
No.
It's not the sort of thing that takes people to the barricades.
It's not exactly Braveheart, is it?
No, and particularly in an atmosphere where people are losing hope, losing faith, as you can see from the turnout at the back.
You'll never take my democratic arrangement.
Well, it's... you maybe could be an advisor to Humza Yousaf Rishi Sunak.
He could do with some help.
They don't pay as much.
No, I know, I've been there. But I mean, this is the problem in Scotland for Humza Yousaf. I mean, he still is kind of perceived as the man that was a sort of puppet put in charge before anything happened to Nicola Sturgeon. I see that she's now passed her driving test. I know that you were asked about this the other day. Well done, Nicola. This means presumably that she'll no longer be a backseat driver and she'll actually sit in the front. I was surprised to see the picture that was put out as a publicity shot that they should have surely put her in a motorhome.
Well, it is going to lead to a whole new generation of jokes on what she's going to be driving. But nonetheless, fair's fair. Congratulations on passing her driving test.
Yeah. Well done, Nicola. Is she on probation then for a year or something like that?
Well, you know...
You can't have anybody the same age in the car with her.
Whatever
kind of thing. So the husband will be OK.
Whatever Humza now thinks of Nicola, it would be very much in his interest to try and carve out his own identity as a political leader. And instead of tearing up a range of daft ideas, daft policies, like self-identification, by stealth or trying to quietly bury them in the background, he should be flamboyantly saying, you know, I'm a new First Minister with a new agenda. The past is the past, the future is me. That's what he should be doing. But he's not doing that. He's tearing them up one by one.
I would count you as one. Have a legacy that they can look back on. I mean, you can look back on the referendum, albeit that you didn't win it, but you got to the point where you had one.
I was preferring to look back and winning an overall majority in a proportional parliament.
You could have done that. But I think, no, but I mean, for people outside of Scotland, say, they would look at you, Alex Salmond, as the man who got to the polls an actual question on whether independence for Scotland was the way forward. And you know, properly, that is a decent legacy. But for Humza Yousaf, what is his legacy even going to look like?
Well, I'll tell you what, you know, anger, I was going to use the word, but, you know, what frustrates people like myself and others who spent 25 years replacing the Labour Party as the dominant force in Scottish politics, when I left office, although we'd been beaten in the referendum, we had an overwhelming tide towards the SNP. The Labour Party were wiped out in Scotland. And I thought it was just a matter of time. I thought effectively the game's over. It's only a question of when independence, not if. So it's deeply frustrating for people of my generation who went through that process over because it did take 25 years to replace the Labour Party in Scotland. To see them being handed back control with no apparent effort whatsoever, it is deeply, deeply frustrating and incidentally a very bad thing for Scotland because the last thing that Scotland needs is the dead hand of the Labour Party back in charge.
Well, no, you would say that, but I mean, others would disagree.
I would say that.
You would. But of course, let's talk about your other business that you're an expert in, and that is the banking business, because you were in that business for a very long time before you decided to go the other way and become a politician. Bankers' bonuses, getting a lot of people exercise today. I'm in the minority.
Yeah, you're
here,
the friend of the bankers. We know that.
Well, I'm not defending the bankers. What I'm defending is the free market. I don't happen to believe that the banks should have been bailed out. I think that was a mistake at the beginning back in 2008, 2009.
Some countries sent them to jail.
Well, exactly right. I mean, if you were that, again, profligate is a word I'm using in place of the Home Office, if you were that profligate and you know what they were doing, NatWest overseas, over in America, Royal Bank of Scotland, were parcelling up all these investments, cutting them in so many different pieces that it was an absolute disaster waiting to happen. I remember being over in America and talking to my sister about it, who was in the banking business, and she was telling me about how a bus driver in Maryland was suddenly being given a $400,000 mortgage to buy a massive house in a very nice part of the outskirts of Washington, D.C. And as soon as, of course, as the house prices fell, that was the end of that. And so they shouldn't have bailed them out. They should have let them die. Similarly, I don't think it's for the EU or any other government to interfere in what a private organisation, albeit publicly owned by shareholders, pays its employees.
Well, the argument, Mike, is that they get bonuses by taking unreasonable risks. And the idea is to try and stop them being incentivised to bring the financial system crashing down. But I worked in the Edinburgh financial sector in the 1980s. I worked in the Royal Bank of Scotland. Now, the Royal Bank was conservative inclined. They weren't particularly radical people, but they were decent people. They cared about their customers. Yeah. They worried about the situation of their customers. And, to me, the banking industry has well, we can see, I mean, as you know, I unlike you, I've got little time for Mr. Farage. But if you look at these comments in the NatWest about one of their customers, now, you would never, ever have had that in the Royal Bank of Scotland in the 1980s. I mean, the customer...
And that is a much bigger problem in some ways than the bonus problem, because I disagree with you to say that they're encouraged to take greater and greater risks. They're not really encouraged, but they're encouraged to be rewarded for a deal that works well.
Right, well, go back to the Big Bang, as it was called. Yeah. And you got a situation where if you were a common sense, normal clearing banker who cared about your customers and tried to keep everything correct and had went through your whole career with total probity, you got so much money. If you were a fly-by-night merchant banker, you got a lot more. And if you had colourful braces in the city, you got a lot more than that. I mean,
I knew many people like that.
There is an argument, Mike, that if you incentivise people to take unreasonable risks, then don't be surprised if they start to erode the foundations of the financial system.
But that's precisely why, if they take a risk and they get exposed and they get done, then therefore you let them go to the wall. You don't save them. You don't bail them out. You don't go,
I see.
Now we've got some money for you.
Your argument, on the one hand, you'd let them make pots of money, but on the other hand, you'd send them to jail when they were caught with their fingers on the till.
I'd send them to jail if they broke the law, certainly. Yeah. And I would also, like Nick Leeson did, and I would also make sure that the system was not capable of being brought down. I mean, I remember the Barings Bank problem. I remember the BCCI problems. I remember the Indian banking crisis. I was well involved in that. Another story for another time. But the fact that the British merchant banks were lending money without any kind of collateral to dodgy banks who were doing all sorts of things in faraway places.
Yeah, sure, but
that should never have been capable of bringing the country banking business down, but it was.
Another difference was
Johnson Matthey
that the financial authorities, that the Bank of England were widely respected. You know, when they could bring the banks together and find a method out of the country lending crisis.
Yeah.
When there wasn't a financial services authority. I mean, you know, how on earth did the financial system survive for so long without the financial services authority or its? Because you take people who fail in the financial services authority and you make them governor of the Bank of England,
and
then you're surprised.
Listen,
and then you're surprised when people can't afford their mortgage.
We're out of time. I'm going to have to put a cap on your speaking engagement here because Sir Alex Salmond, I'm going to call you that. Thank you very much indeed.